Hello there, I'm back again. This is video number 3, and there's something I need to pick up on which relates to the last video. I was in a bit of a rush trying to put bearings into hot casings and stuff like that, so let me just set the camera up and expand on something a little bit. Now, when you saw me assemble the gearbox, or assemble this bearing into the gearbox, this is a spare one by the way, I put this shim in first of all. It's very important when you put this in that you recognize that there's a transition from the cylindrical surface where the bearing goes to the horizontal surface where this goes and the bearing butts up against. So you need to make sure that this is slightly reduced in diameter when compared to the outer one, so that it sits down and doesn't go buckled and puckered as this one is. Now I had to reduce the diameter of the inner shield from 2750 to 2700. So I had to take in effect 25 thou off the perimeter of this, which I did by carefully marking it out with some tape and then just ever so gently rotating it on a grindstone. Kind of primitive really, but there's nothing else you can do as long as you don't get grit and dirt into the gearbox itself. Right, I'd just like to move on now to this outer casing. As you can see, I've already fitted the bearing and the little circlip that holds it in place. I just heated this up, pushed the bearing in, tapped it home, and then put the circlip there. Nothing really dramatic there. Similarly, this brass bush that's gone in, I eased it ever so gently so that it was easy to get in. I used this as just a piece of M12 studding with some very robust washers, and I used a spacer from an old socket, and I was able to pull that in, and again with the casing heated, and it went in nicely. So I can just show you that goes in there. That's going to work nicely. Difficult to deal with this one hand, but as you can see there's an oil hole there, and that's going to be lubricated nicely. So in fact, while I'm on the subject of lubrication, if you look up here, all the oil getting churned around throws oil up here. This is on a slight slope. The oil comes here, passes the gasket, and goes into this space here, and ultimately then falls down through a hole and falls in on this side of the bearing, and slowly as it fills this annulus up, it works its way through the bearing. So there's actually pretty good lubrication for that. And then this part here with a gasket goes on and covers that. So the casting has got a couple more things I need to work on. I need to look at the linkage, and the next thing I need to do is to position the Kickstarter, and as I've already mentioned, there's quite a lot involved in that because I've got to get the end float right on the lay shaft. So that's about it really so far. Right, back at the lathe again. I've just decided to make this little bridge piece which will go between the rose joints so that I can establish the gear change linkage. So just a few little bits of drilling and tapping, and I might even try a little bit of a polishing act on this to make it shine a little bit, for no reason other than I can. So let's get on with it. Actually, the camera is exactly where I don't really want it, but I don't know what else I can do about that. So I've just center drilled that. Now I need to put a 5mm drill in before I put the 6mm tap in, 6mm by 1mm thread pitch. Right, I've just put a little bit of salt ball on this and I'm just giving it a bit of a polish. I've marked out where I'm going to part it off, and I'm just going through the final motions here, putting a bit of a shine on this. For no reason, as I said, other than I can. It's easy when you've got something rotating like this. Right. That'll do nicely. This is just a quick look at the finished article. 2 rose joints disposed at 90 degrees to one another. The next job will be making up some pins which will go into these parts. These are a little bit over 1/4 inch, so I'll make pins to suit and then step them down to the 6mm here for these rose joints, and then I shall put a 6mm nut on those. So that's the next little bit of activity, which will be on the lathe. So I'm back on the lathe again. I'm just going to start making up these pins. This is a piece of hot rolled mild steel which I believe will be strong enough. I tried touching this with the carbide tip, but the geometry of that tip is kind of crude, so I'm back now to an old-fashioned piece of tooled steel which I've ground a tip on myself. Right, I've now got that pin down to a nice size. It's a close fit in this, and the next thing now is to turn this bit down to 6mm and then put a 6mm thread on it. Right, I've just mounted the 6mm die in the die holder. Just put that in there and then put that, there's the little die holder, and then that will slide up and down. That's it, didn't take long. And now I'll just go full astern. Oh, still there, yes. That's it, nice. I'll go there, and that'll go on that. Right, next thing is just chop this off and clean it up, and that'll be one done. Well, that's what this thing looks like. There's the linkage, and this one will rock up and down. I just have to make sure that there's enough spacing here to make sure this can move in and out. But this is going to work nicely. It's not going to hit any of the gears there, or more or less on this the center line between there and there. So I'm fairly happy with the way this is working out. And there you are. Let me just give you a slightly close-up view. There's the pin, and everything fits nicely, and I'll just Loctite that in place. That's it. Right, let's just have a quick look at the way this Kickstarter boss works. First of all, I'll put in these 2 little pins. Here's the third one. They push in there like that, and they butt up against that flange in there. and that means then that when they go in, and that goes like that, hang on, let me just push that through, then there's this is a thrust pad, and that goes down there. You might be able to see the pins, and so with that in there, that goes there, and if I try and keep my thumb on it and I raise the Kickstarter, see, that stays put, and that controls end float on the lay shaft, even though the Kickstarter has now been driven out and is now nominally engaged with the Kickstarter gear. So if I push that in there, those pins keep that thrust face in the same position. So if I just take that apart, get the pins out, they only go in from one direction, unfortunately, and there's a spring then which goes in there first of all, and then as the Kickstarter winds down this ramp, the spring pushes this out and it engages with the, in fact there's the spring there, let me just put that on. So you see there's a natural tendency for that to move in and out, and indeed the Kickstarter with the cotter pin controls that and stops it. So as soon as the Kickstarter comes down, it winds down that, and then it engages with the other side of this coupling, and that's it. And while all this is moving, those pins keep, and that thrust pad keep everything under control. And this is the bearing that the lay shaft runs on. As it happens, this is a very nice fit. It's heavily scrolled, so it'll be well lubricated. And while I have this in my hand, some of you may have noticed that this casting is not polished. It's just a raw casting that's been machined. In fact, this is from an era when Velocette started producing slipstream glass fiber panels that went over the engine casing and the gearbox. I seem to remember reading somewhere that raised the speed ever so slightly. It might be something I can think about, but I kind of like the idea of naked engines from the aesthetic point of view, and at the moment I have a yardstick of everything being as it is, and it'll be very easy for me to see if there are any changes in performance based on this. Anyway, look, that just gives you an idea of what goes on with this Kickstarter. Not only has it got to be shimmed up to get, or managed, these pins come in a couple of lengths. There's also the chance to put a gasket on this surface if I need it. It should not have one as original. And then I need to preload the spring tension for the Kickstarter. So there's quite a lot goes on in getting this to rights. So I think that's definitely enough for now. Well, here we are at the end of video 3. Unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing more that I can do until I get the conversion kit from Quaife. So I'm not giving up. I've too much invested in this at this stage. So all I can say is thank you for watching, and the customary exhortation here is to like and subscribe and all the rest of that. But keep an eye out. I will be making another video, or maybe two, to document the building and the actual insertion of the 5-speed kit. So until that time, thank you very much. All the best. Bye bye.